Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Geostrategy in Action, in which we explore how companies around the world are adapting their operations and strategies to key geopolitical developments. So, I'm Courtney Rickert McCaffrey, the EY Global Geostrategy Insights Leader. And today we're actually going to dive into how the current geopolitical environment is affecting companies in Latin America, particularly across the industrials and energy sectors. So, I'm really pleased to welcome Dr. Andres Aramayo, the Industrials and Energy Leader for Latin America, to Geostrategy in Action today to share what he's seeing and hearing in this space. So, Andres, welcome. I'm really excited to talk to you today about what you're seeing and hearing from clients across Latin America. And to kick it off, there's been a lot of attention on policy and regulatory changes in the United States this year, of course. And it seems many people maybe haven't been following as closely some of the developments in Latin America. So, what important policy or political or geopolitical events would you highlight that are really affecting businesses in the region?
Very good. Thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity, Courtney, and I'm delighted to be part of this podcast and share my thoughts with the audience. Um, Perhaps before I answer your question, Courtney, I would love to take a step back and actually make an important point to set the context. Latin America is actually a region with a distinctive natural resources endowment, right? This is very important to bear in mind. If you think of renewables, the best wind, solar irradiation, hydro potential globally is in Latin America. If you think of silver, Mexico has the largest deposits globally. If you think of iron ore, Brazil has the largest reserves. If you think of oil and gas, the equatorial region has also the highest reserves in the world. So this is very important because the next point to think about is if you think about the correlation between these natural resources endowments and the wealth creation in the region, the correlation is probably very low, right? And that's where geo and local politics come to play, right? Depends heavily on how those two forces interplay, if you will, amongst other things, of course, to let's say to ensue the value creation, right? Um, if you were to paint a map of Latin America, coloring, let's say, given different colors to whether a country is open or restrictive in terms of geopolitics, you would see a very mixed map, right? You would see very different colors across the region. Uh, if you use that as a starting point to see what the developments have been so far, or what are the important developments right now, I would highlight a few. One, Mexico, for example, is a country that used to be on a very, let's say, on the very open side. For a period of time, it became a lot more restrictive. So the capital flows, particularly in the energy sector, did not necessarily go at the same pace that they used to go in the past. And now it is actually kind of showing some signs of reaperture, right? So that may mean that there will be further investments on the energy side. Industrial side is a bit different because in the case of Mexico, you have the USMCA treaty, etc., that has, kind of protected, if you will, the construct that used to be in place. But for the energy sector, that is particularly relevant. Another interesting country where there are developments right now is Guyana. So let me go down to Central America. And Guyana has recently had a re-election of the governing party. And that means that they will continue with, let's say, with a regulatory framework that allows the capital flows to go into the energy sector, right? Big resources in oil and gas, with a ton of investment going into the region, and with continuity of the ruling party, gives a good outlook going forward. Another interesting one is Bolivia. If you go down to South America, Bolivia, after a 20-year period of a highly restrictive environment, is now at the brink of change, quite frankly, from a political standpoint. This country is, filled with gas, tin, lithium, among others. And that is, an important beacon to watch out as well. Finally, and this is just not to be super exhaustive, but Argentina is also, has also started to put in place a regulatory environment that shows much more stability compared to the previous administrations, and that is generating a lot of interest and a lot of capital flows as well into the region.
Mhm.
Those are a few that I would like to highlight, Courtney.
Yeah, that's great. It's good roundup around the region. Lots of different developments. and sort of opportunities, I think, as you were sort of highlighting some of those regulatory frameworks. So, I mean, if we look more broadly, I guess, than the region now, so, looking apart from what's happening within some of those countries in the region, how is Latin America affected by geopolitical developments in other parts of the world? So, how are companies in the region kind of adapting to this geopolitical environment at the global level? Are there any new challenges or opportunities as a result of some of those shifts?
So I think there are two angles, first of all, to set the context of that part of the conversation, Courtney. One is the geopolitics are going to translate basically into trade, investment flows, and supply chains, right? So that's one way to look at it, and we're going to into it in a second. The second one is, what are the key trends that are happening, right? So, for example, the US China tension that exists right now, or the European Union's very high standards in ESG, and of course, the regional politics, right? So, if you put those things together and you start to see what is happening in Latin America, or how those forces are exerting pressure in Latin America, the region is actually, adapting to those by, I would say, first of all, long-term contracts and optics. This is particularly relevant in the mining sector, and this is to mitigate the cyclicalities of the industry. So we can see that there is actually a trend of that happening. Second one is probably a multi-jurisdictional footprint. This is to be tax effective. And the likes of Bimbo, Cemex, Latam Airlines are, creating these super regions to be able to mitigate those challenges. Thirdly, technology definitely something that is being used as an adaptative force to this, to the situation. The use of agentic AI, for example, for concrete cases to scan regulatory challenges and alert, executives is something that is more and more commonplace in Latin America. So those are kind of some of the adaptation mechanisms I'm seeing across the region.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially that last point around using technology to sort of adapt and mitigate some of the risks in this space. And I think that's something we've been hearing from some other clients as well. So interesting you bring that up. Well, I know you obviously work most closely with clients in the industrials and energy sectors, which, as you mentioned, has historically been an area of strength for Latin America. So, what are some of the trends you're seeing among companies in those sectors in particular?
Yeah, I would highlight two trends in particular, Courtney. One is the concept of energy to intelligence, let me call it like that, which in essence, it's a better way to monetize the gas molecule by generating power to fuel data centers, right? That is certainly the case that we're seeing in the case of Guyana, where it is better, or it is better to think about how do you use that gas to fuel the data center immediately and then export that, let's say, that the data into the different regions, rather than export the molecule of gas via LNG or via pipeline, which are obviously very expensive options, right? So that's an important trend that is happening in the continent. That actually ensues to the second one, which is the concept of the of the intelligence sovereignty, right? So the rules of the game are being written right now as to, some countries may be much more restrictive as to, how much of the information or the data can be exported vis-a-vis other countries which may be, are much more open to that. So that's another important lookout right now, and the rules of the game are being defined, as I said, and that will define, what the footprint of in what the end game of the footprint in this energy to intelligence will come in the future.
Yeah, absolutely, Andres. That's a great point. I mean, that's something that we see a lot of conversations around in terms of, yeah, sovereign AI or kind of sovereign data centers and all of that. And interesting to hear how that's playing out within Latin America as well. So I guess perhaps looking ahead, what makes you most optimistic about how the geopolitical environment could create new growth opportunities for the region in the future?
Yeah, so I think intrinsically Latin America has a very, I would say, a distinctive talent workforce, right? So a very, I would say, young workforce with pockets of very high qualifications, particularly when it comes to the industrial sector, and also a very entrepreneurial workforce, right? So if you look at the activity globally, the activity of M&A, for example, over the last few years has been very slow. Not necessarily the case in LATAM, right? In LATAM, there have been pockets of a lot of activity, and this is precisely a testament of the entrepreneurial nature of the workforce in Latin America. So I would say that is, apart from the natural endowment, the natural resources, the endowment that I mentioned, I think the talent is something definitely to leverage on.
Yeah, thanks, Andres. That's really insightful. So, I guess maybe just one final question, if you have any final thoughts to share. What's maybe the main advice that you give to your clients in the current geopolitical environment?
I think we're in front of a game-changing context, Courtney. The very essence of our construct of the world is in question in terms of, how the manufacturing and industrial processes are set up. The era of hyper specialization where you build something in one place and you transport it for miles and miles is no longer necessarily, the way forward, given that this is not compatible with environment either, right? So right now we are at the brink of how do we create a new construct that will be, environmentally friendly, wealth creating, et cetera, et cetera. Um, as we speak, and again, with all the geopolitics that is happening right now, those rules are being changed and or are being written, and it is very important for the businesses to be able to capture, the opportunity, and quite frankly, pragmatically to incorporate how they see this geopolitical context into their strategy, right? So for years and years, geopolitics has been kind of a framework that has been kind of set out there, and you do your scenario planning given certain premises of the geopolitical situation. Right now, that geopolitical situation is changing, right? And it is important to incorporate that into your strategy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely echoing a lot of what I am talking with clients with about as well, just in terms of the importance of scenario planning and thinking through multiple potential futures, just given everything's so uncertain right now. So thank you, Andres. This was really insightful conversation. Interesting to hear about so many of the things that are sort of happening around Latin America, both in terms of the regulatory and political environment, as well as with companies in the region. And I think one of the key takeaways here is that idea of from energy to intelligence and how that could shape the future of Latin America in terms of certain businesses and how things operate. So thank you again for joining us. And thank you all for joining us for this episode of Geostrategy in Action. I hope to see you next time as well.